Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back, everyone. This is The Deconstructed Woman with Elisa Marie and Joji. And today we're going to be talking about optimism. Were you born with it? Did you formulate it as a child? Or are you becoming optimistic as time goes on? And this is a topic that I've been thinking about for about a week, given the fact that I'm reading a book called How Champions Think by Dr. Bob Rotella. He's a sports psychologist, and he has been coaching different well-known athletes over the last, it seems, 20, 30 years on perfecting their skill set and rising to the top of their game, whatever that is. And he talks about golf and basketball and other celebrities also as they're trying to hone their skill set for their chosen path. And he talks about almost like an evolution of skills that you need. And the first thing he talks about is optimism. And not surprising for me, that was the first part that stumped me. And so looking at what he says, he goes on to say that the ideas people choose to have about themselves largely determine the quality of lives they lead. And that if we, he says, quote unquote, fall in love with our abilities, then or our potential, and then we can choose to maximize on those skills. And so he also talks about the fact that you can learn how to be optimistic, that it's not something you have to be born with. And that was a relief to me because I wasn't necessarily born with optimism, I don't think. I think I was more born with anxiety. But as I get older, I feel a new sense of optimism about controlling my life, that my life will turn out well, that I can make my life be better than I originally thought. And so I feel like as I get older, I'm injecting or infusing optimism into my life. And I wanted to get Alyssa's thoughts on this because we haven't really talked a lot about optimism in the past or like how we were raised or brought up per se. And so, Alyssa, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a little bit of a backstory about what you think about optimism and how it may or may not have shaped your life.
Yeah, so I think when you first brought up this conversation, I thought it was interesting because the first thing that came to my mind was, of course, the idea of changing your mindset and of shifting to being able to say, okay, I'm going to be optimistic. But I do agree that I think that's a skill set. It's something that you learn, and it's not something that comes naturally for everybody. The thing that made me think of, because obviously this is a framework of champions and people excelling in things, and it took me back to when I was first going to college, and I originally was going to be a musical theater major, and I went to a couple of auditions, like that was my plan, but I wasn't super optimistic about what that was going to look like long term. It made me nervous. I wasn't sure how that was going to be because I think you probably could chalk it up to anxiety as well, anxious about what if I lose my voice and I lose my career and that doesn't seem very stable. And all of those kind of insecurities and fears took over. And so I ultimately changed course and went in a very different direction to criminal justice. And so I think that definitely resonates with me in that regard, in that lack of optimism didn't push me to pursue something that may have changed the total trajectory of my life. And by no means am I disappointed by that. I think that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. But I do think that there's a certain level of optimism that pushes somebody to go past those fears and anxieties into the next phase, whatever that looks like. And I think that a lot of times we get stopped in our tracks in that moment of feeling like I can't do this, or what ifs, or whatever things mull around in our heads that kind of create those obstacles for us pushing through to that next level. So I think that makes a lot of sense, but I think that optimism is something that you have to foster. And I think that there's a lot of things that kind of work against us in our society. And hopefully that makes sense. But I think that's how I first viewed it.
And just to you had asked me a question, is optimism all you need? And of course, Dr. Rotella says, no, it's not all you need, but that's like the foundation. And then from there, you have to add in confidence and then persistence. And I think that the confidence and the persistence lead to the daily routine or the work effort you have to put to become excellent at whatever you do. But just to close out that conversation, optimism is not all you need, but you also need the ability to see yourself doing it and then to get the skills and hone in those skills to become the best in whatever it is that you're doing. And so going back a little bit, one of the things that I'm also trying to wrap my head around is how do you overcome if you didn't have optimism as being something that you learned at a very young age? So this is what I'm trying to really sort out in my mind is I think I've become a more optimistic person. And as a result of that, how do you focus on optimism so that the anxiety that I was most likely born with doesn't interrupt that trajectory? So, how do you now incorporate those ideas into something to say, you know what, if I want it bad enough, or I can focus my energy and work hard enough at it, then I can actually get there is I think is the puzzle that I'm trying to figure out. So, Alyssa, how do you respond to that? What do you think is what does that look like for you? Or just if somebody like me asked you, I guess I am asking you, what would you advise in terms of how do you get there?
I think that, again, if it's a challenging question because I think that in some ways we're encouraged by those around us to say, hey, you have this particular talent. Or I think that really the people around us, whether it's our parents or coaches or mentors or things like that, like there's people that are rallying behind us to help us guide us to what we're good at, where our talents lie. And I think that's something that we don't just naturally like go into one particular direction. I think that or that we on our own, I don't know that people find that. I think in almost every story that I've heard, somebody, whether it be a teacher or a coach or somebody said, hey, to this person who excelled, I think this is something that might be good for you. And so I think that it's fostered through the people around you that give you that optimism and encouragement, and then you build it from there. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, I think that is it possible for you to be the person who sees your own skill or your own success and can make that happen if you don't have somebody to rally behind you? I definitely think you can do that. I do think that it is not going to happen if you yourself doesn't see that in yourself and you don't have a cheerleader behind you. I don't know how that's going to be possible then. And I guess that's what I'm thinking about in my own situation. I think I had shared with you, Alyssa, before we started that as I've been thinking about this whole conversation, I reflected back a little bit about my childhood and I think that my family, my parents expected all of us to be successful, but whether they were immigrants and didn't know how to navigate the society or because of other reasons, I'm not exactly sure. They didn't necessarily provide us the structure on how to be successful. It was just like a requirement to be successful. And being the fact that we also were immigrants and we didn't know the system and we were also very young and didn't have the resources or maybe even the ability to ask for whatever it is that we needed, I think that was something that you can almost say there was no structure to that desire for success. And so then I think that was also the challenge is that because we were new, we had a little bit of instability about how to navigate the system. And yet it was told to us that we have to be successful. And so I think that in itself led to an uncertainty or an anxiety or a self fulfillment of fear of failure or just worrying about how that was. And then in my family, very specifically about what would be acceptable and what would not be acceptable. And so it wasn't just about being successful. It was being successful about very specific career choices. And so I don't know what I would have done if those career choices was something that I was just like, "Oh, I'm not gonna be able to." Ultimately, I didn't end up doing what my parents wanted, but at the same time, I bought into that story at a young age, and that led me to where I ended up. But if I didn't think that was gonna be possible at a young age and my family didn't offer the structure I needed, I'm not really sure what would have happened because I didn't really have a teacher or a coach or somebody who really believed in me until I was probably my first job. My first job, I remember my director of social work, he had said to me, "I can see you leading this organization." And that was the first person who actually saw something in me that was like, okay. And I was fresh out of school. Like I was brand spanking new. I didn't know really anything about navigating the administrative world of social work and community mental health. But he said, almost like, stick with me, kid. I've got you. And he developed my career. And if I had stayed with him, I suspect that I would have been running that company. But he bolstered me to the point where I also outgrew that position and I wanted to really spread my wings in probably bigger than his vision was for me at that time, which is interesting because I know that I hurt his feelings when I left the company because all of a sudden I was on this trajectory that couldn't even contain me. Like I needed to keep going. And he wanted me to tread water for 20 years when he retired, when I could take over his position. And that was just something that I couldn't do. But that's the feeling that I associate with when somebody says, I see this in you. You can become anything you want. You can be this person. And so definitely, Alyssa, I connect with that person in my life who was my biggest cheerleader. It didn't come into my life until I was 25, but it really changed my perception in lots of different ways. How did you develop that optimism, do you believe?
Like I said, I think I'm focused on, I've done a lot since college, going back to graduate school and things like that. But I'm, for this conversation, focused on, what I thought was going to be my career, which was the musical theater. And I think that was fostered very early by people are like, oh, you can sing. You should try out for that specialty choir. I was like, okay, that sounds like fun. And then it built from there. And then I started doing solos and musicals and show choir. And people were always like, you have such a talent. You need to foster this. You need to keep going. I think it was around the time, I think I was in college. I don't know. I have to look back, but like American Idol was coming out at some point during the time period. And so they were like, "Oh, you could be on American Idol." And I was like, "Oh, I could." And there was just a lot of discussion of this is where you belong. But I don't want to say that without also acknowledging that there was a lot of obstacles and challenges. I remember there was this particular choir that there was only is a 12-person vocal jazz group in my high school. And I thought, given that I was so talented, like I would have gotten in my sophomore year, and I didn't get picked my sophomore year, and I didn't get picked my junior year. And so my senior year, I really had to work very hard for my audition piece and really to show off my voice because I knew that I wanted to be in this specialty choir, but I wasn't sure that I would get picked at all because it was potential that that there wouldn't be a spot for me, or they have to have certain amount of altos and sopranos and tenors and basses. And so it was one of those things where I had to keep trying, even though I felt very discouraged the 2 years previous when I wasn't chosen. And yet I kept saying to myself, this is what I want. This is, if I'm going to sing, if I'm going to be the best of the best, I have to keep trying, because if I don't, then all of this is lost, all this effort. And so I pushed through. I was selected my senior year. And so I was able to travel with that choir and do a lot of great things and even had some solos in it. And so again, I think that I had that, I think I would call it optimism. I had a desire and a persistence to carry through, even in light of being rejected, if you will, 2 years in a row. I think that was hard. It was a hard blow to what I thought my talent level was. but it made me work that much harder to get into that show choir, or that was that particular choir. So I think that there's different aspects of it, but I definitely think that persistence or perseverance is an important aspect too, because without that, I don't know that when you have those harder experiences that kind of knock you down or put you back to square one, if you don't have that perseverance, you may just let go of whatever your goal is at that point and say, "Oh, I guess it wasn't meant to be."
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what the book talks about, which is you need to have optimism, confidence, and persistence. And the persistence is that exactly the way you described it, that every time you take a step back for one reason or another, you do find the ability with the combination of optimism and confidence to push through that to the point to keep trying. Because as he interviews all the different LeBron James and all the people in the book that he talks about, he says, although we know them now as being these superstars, they weren't always that superstar. Even LeBron James, to read his book, features him early in the book, and he talks about, and I'm not a huge basketball person, but I've heard the name for decades at this point, and apparently even in high school and college, he was really seen as a superstar, and everybody knew he was going to be drafted. But apparently his weakness was three-point shot. And so really about the work he had to do to overcome that because everybody knew what his weakness was and the team would know how to go after him. And taking that skill that you don't have and continuing to work on it and work on it. And that's where the persistence comes from, is knowing that you're not perfect, right? You're gonna have to overcome something because you've got strengths and weaknesses, and the determination he had to fully focus on that 3-point shot and to really make it better. And the fact of the matter is that he wasn't the best 3-point shooter either. He just had to get to a certain place that now his overall skill level across all the different skills required in basketball had really become all that much better. And so that lifted his overall shot. And so I do believe that your story encapsulates what Dr. Rotella really speaks to in terms of what does it take to be that. But I do think that as we get older, he was seen as a young child and in high school and in college as being this superstar. And so that got him to a certain place in his career. He was already drafted and all this stuff. I think where in your life that happened also is critical. For me, it didn't happen until I was in my 20s. And so I feel like I was almost limping along, very focused on success, but still trying to figure out what does that look like given the pros and cons I brought with me. And then maybe I hit a cheerleader in my 20s that really then showed me what I can do with confidence. With skill and confidence, then does come something else. And so I didn't get that until later. You were seen with everybody, or most people recognized your beautiful voice and your ability to really rise to those levels. And then you worked hard when you had to, even though you had setbacks. You believed them. You heard the cheerleaders and the people who told you that you were good. And so that carried you through, and then throw in your persistence. And then that really got you where you wanted to be. And so I have a question for you, Alyssa. So then, after that success and then going to college, what was it that then interrupted your thought to go into musical theater or to continue pursuing more of that? It sounds like maybe from what you said earlier, maybe it was a dose of reality or wanting stability, which seems like that's something that's important to you. But I'm just curious, not to put you on the spot, but at what point after those successes did you decide that you were going to change directions?
Yeah, so I mean, so it is like, the anxiety and the fears and the lack of stability. And I think that what it came down to was I went to some very prestigious schools on the East Coast with were kind of known as like the kind of filter to Broadway. And I walked the halls and I looked in the rooms and I saw the people, and I didn't see people loving their talent. I saw people working hard, but the love for it was like, well, now I have to go to the next level. Like I have to make a career to make money. I need to pay the bills. Like it was almost like a shift in perspective from like in high school and even early college. Like for me, singing and performing was like a way to share that gift with others, but also just to it was exciting and exhilarating. And it had such a I don't know how to describe it, but like for most people who have there's something you're good at. Like it's exhilarating to do that, and so it wasn't for a paycheck, it wasn't to pay the bills, it was a love of mine, and so when I saw that shift in how I observed the people in those rooms practicing hour after hour, it's just like this it stole that beauty of it from me, and I was taken aback and said, "Okay, do I really wanna do this?" I also have parents who wanted me to succeed, and I wasn't sure that I think I felt like a very small fish in a very big ocean, and I wasn't sure that I could take it all the way. I grew up in a small country town, so being the best there wasn't a lot of kids in my grade, there wasn't a lot of kids in my school, so it wasn't as hard, but then when you go to the East Coast, New York and Philadelphia and all of these kind of other places where there hundreds upon thousands of people all auditioning for the same spot, same role in a musical. Now it becomes, are you that good? I don't know. I think that it can really take its toll on your confidence in that moment. And so I think that's where for me it was like, okay, I wanted to be able to do both, but I'm not sure that I can. I'm not sure that I can really take the next level and be willing to try then if you fail, what do I do then? I think that was probably the biggest piece and the shift for me and the ability to say, yeah, I'm not sure if this is for me.
Well, the other thing that you touch upon, which happens in this book, is that he talks about the fact that talent is really, how do I say this? If you allow, as long as you don't think about your talent, as long as you let your unconscious do the work, then your talent actually flows without any interruption. And he actually teaches that whenever you're doing what you love, you have to you have to stop from overthinking it so that your performance is really tied to doing what's automatic and what's natural to you in that state of being. And so I think that's the other thing I identify is that anxiety you and I both talked about. I think once we let that anxiety creep into our brain, then that talent gets interrupted, which is what he says happens always. And part of his coaching with the people he's working with is to let go of that thinking mind, disconnect that, and let your talent and the hours of practice that you've done take over almost to the point where your body is so automatically doing and performing that your thinking brain is not actually intact during that time because it will automatically 100% will interrupt your flow. And so I think that's the other critical part, which takes such discipline, is not to overthink. And for me, that is probably my kryptonite in so many different ways, because I'm not sure whether we talk about the critical voice in our head or you think about the superego if you're talking psychology talk or whatever it is. That is probably something that I have overindulged over my lifetime. And as a result of that, the only thing that's automatic is probably more so than anything else that negative self talk. And we've talked about this in the past. We've talked about how women, that's one of the hardest things for us in general to put on the shelf as we're functioning is not that critical voice or a society telling us how to behave or things like that. But I think that these two principles are related. Being a woman, trying to overcome our skepticism, whether it's ours or families, societies, whatever, to get to that next level. So it's interesting that we're moving in this direction, or my mind is moving in that direction. Alyssa, what do you think about that and the macro system of how that influences this very personal conversation we're having about our own level of optimism and self in and confidence about a skill that we have? How do you think that society or that bigger picture affects us as well?
I definitely think that I think that there's probably a lot of past topics you could tie into this in some way, shape, or form because I think that there is a lot of factors that we've talked about before, anxieties that come in, fears, imposter syndrome, like all of these different things that kind of take hold and create obstacles, like I talked before, to achieving like those particular goals. I think I missed how we're tearing it to women in particular, but I can probably circle back if you bring it back to what you were saying.
I was just saying that as we think about how women in society are almost internalized, or we are forced to internalize the cynic about what we can do and what we can't do. And almost that we do put our dreams and hopes on the shelf for the bigger purpose, which might be your family or your children, your spouse, and that we're always last on that list. That how do you overcome your own passion for and maybe potentially sacrifice your relationship, your family, your children, because you have this ultimate goal? Is that why a lot of people, a lot of women who are highly successful do tend to be loners or not have a circle of friends or deep relationship with their family? And can you have it all? I don't know.
Yeah, it makes me think of a couple I had to look at the time, I was like, "How much time do we have?" That might be an additional topic just because of that there was a lot of offshoots that my mind went to, but it makes me think of Working Moms. So there's a episode in Working Mom or it's just like a character flown in Working Mom who is the top of her company, and she very successful, and she decides that she wants to have a baby. She's like, "I have all of these things, but this is something that I don't have. This is something that I want." And so she really struggles with that of, "Is this a good decision? I'm gonna have a baby out. I have no partner." Her job she's married to her job. Her job is what brings her that success, and so I think that she articulates it very well of or you see that transition for her and her kind of identifying, "I want this, but I do wanna have it all, but can I? I think I can, but I'm not sure." And so ultimately she does hopefully I'm not ruining the show for somebody, but she ultimately does have a child, and then it shows her struggles with that in the workforce because she works in, I think, like, commercialism and publication. And there's a lot of challenges that she faces after, even trying to pump while in a board meeting would crack me up. She's trying to do it all, and really that she recognizes, "I can't do it all, and I have to pull back from this position and where I'm at and recognize that I'm human." And I think that's one example of it. I think that there's probably personal examples as well that we can all pull from because I know for me, my goal was to be in the FBI by 35 because that's the age cutoff. And at some point, I decided that I'm not going to go that route because I want to have a family. And so changing again my trajectory because of what I thought was the goal or my goals or my objective changed over time. And so I obviously didn't pursue that. So I think that it definitely can change, but I think at the end of the day, we can't do it all. We have to pick and choose. And so there's people out there who have really successful careers that don't have families or their family looks different from the traditional one. But I think that there's people who let go of those dreams also to have what they deemed more important. And I think those shift over time.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think success as we age, look, the definition changes and what we want to be successful in also changes. And so we're constantly evolving. And I think that's natural. And I think that's also a sign of success and appropriate aging as well. And so I guess I have a curiosity, and forgive me for this, Alyssa, but as we're wrapping this up, I'm curious about your because after all the time we've known each other, I don't think I ever knew that you were a songstress and that one that might have been something you pursued pretty strongly when you were in high school and college. And so I guess, do you have an outlet for singing now, or is that something that you might pursue? And I don't mean go on Broadway after you've raised your children. I just mean, how do you keep that love of singing alive, or do you have plans for the future about that?
I sing every day, whether it be in the car or in my house. Music is very much a part of our home. So it was funny because the other day I was telling my daughter that not everybody can sing. And she was like, "What?" Like, she assumed everybody sings like as much as we do or like on key. And I was like, "Yeah, that's actually like a talent. Not everybody has it." She's like, "Oh, that's strange. I didn't know that." Because I sing pretty regularly for them. And really, that brings me joy when we're cleaning up or doing like that. So I've only kept it in my house. I have considered like doing the community talent show or things like that. But I think that it would take a lot of optimism and confidence and perseverance to get me back on stage after really almost 20 something years, probably more, 25 plus years of not performing. So I think it would definitely be an obstacle, but something that I may think about as things settle and I enter the new next season of my life. It might be something that I would return to, but I definitely there would be a lot to overcome because I think that those fears would creep back in.
I do feel like as you get older, you also get more secure in who you are. So whatever you choose to do with music, I think you'll be at a better place than maybe you might think you are today. But yeah, that's where community theater and community music and things like that. But I also think infusing your family with music is also a real gift for them, because what a wonderful thing to for your kid not to know that every family doesn't have music as part of their foundation every single day. So I think that just exposing your children to music and lifting their musicality might be something that I think is a beautiful gift to them as well. I think about wrapping up on optimism and closing the loop a little bit. I think what I'm excited about in terms of optimism and this whole conversation is my opportunity to choose where I want to put that energy right now. And one of the things that I've been really focused on with the rise of having grandchildren and things like that is really about longevity and really all the things that have been barriers in my life becoming more present and understanding what it requires, because it does, longevity will still require confidence to do the right thing, making the right food choices, the exercise choices that allow my body to stay healthy as I want to remain functioning into my 80s and 90s, I hope. And also, it's funny, I'm actually taking a class. I don't think I've talked about this with you, Alyssa, but I've had this interesting fascination with bonsai trees lately, and I've bought bonsais in the past, but this is something I'm actually wanting to grow my own bonsai from seed and then to learn how to shape it. So I'm actually starting a bonsai class in June, and it's not something that I would have done in the past to actually travel 45 minutes to go take a class somewhere. It's not something I like to do on a Saturday morning when I should be sleeping, honestly, but I'm interested and intrigued by it. And when my daughter for Mother's Day was with me at this bonsai specialty store, she said, "Mom, these bonsais are like 25, 45 years old." And she, "Do you have enough time for that?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "I really do." I said, "Think about it. If I start today, then in 25 years, I'm going to have a decent bonsai. I've got 25 years to put into that." And she looked at me and I chuckled and I said, "That's like my new philosophy. This is all I have is time." And so it was interesting and maybe a full circle moment where I was like, yeah, I got plenty of time. Time is on my side. And so I do feel that is a sense of optimism I haven't had before, which I'm really excited about. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I wouldn't mind if you listen, if you want to close us out and add your thoughts that you might have.
Sure. I love that story. And I'm chuckling over here. Of course, you have time. So I'm excited to see that develop and grow. But for all of our listeners, we hope that you enjoyed this conversation and that you had time to listen in. And we would love to hear from you, whether it be in our Facebook group at the Deconstructed Woman podcast or in our email. We're more than happy to get your comments, hear your thoughts, and continue this conversation through to the next stage. Until our next episode, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.